Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Frank Baker, Boston City Council for District 3. I'm the chair of Boston City Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. I want to remind people that this is a public hearing being recorded and broadcast live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964, and streamed on www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. And we will be taking public testimony at the end here. You can sign in over here, or I believe we do have some people on Zoom. Or you may also submit written testimony by emailing ccc planning, plandev@boston.gov. Today's hearing is twofold. We have two dockets we're going to do. They both discuss DIFs, deferred incremental financing, if I have that right. One is docket 0379, in order for a hearing calling for the district incremental financing to be utilized in District 7. And then we also have docket 0413, in order for a hearing to discuss district improvement financing DIF from Kosciuszko Circle through Morrissey Boulevard. And I'm joined by my colleagues, the sponsor of 0379, Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson from District 7, my colleague at large from Dorchester, Erin Murphy. And I think the way where we have two different sort of subjects here. We have a proposal that's a little more baked, and then we have one for District 7 that I think what we should do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor, this is your thing, but I want to be helpful. Maybe if we could talk about what a DIF is, how they're applied, the many different ways that we can capture future dollars, and maybe areas of Roxbury where would be appropriate for a DIF. So I guess that's my opening statement there. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, would you like an opening statement?
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Just want to really learn about this more than I've researched, and understanding how it works, as Councilor Baker, the chair, mentioned. Just specifically, we have, of course, projects, and there are a lot of candidates for contracts in order to execute this. Looking forward to a fruitful conversation, and hopefully we'll take this somewhere to improve our communities. Thank you.
Great. Councilor Murphy.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for filing these different districts, but as an at-large city councilor, care a lot about this. But being from Dorchester, decades I've driven on Morrissey Boulevard and have been, most mornings I'm in that Kosciuszko Circle, so know that, and hope to learn more also about the DIFs and how this benefit can help with traffic, because I know one of the community benefits oftentimes does include traffic remedies that many of our neighborhoods need to make sure that these housing that we desperately need to be built and development across the city, that we're supporting our infrastructure in ways that are much needed. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn that over to whoever wants to start. And again, let's talk first about what DIFs are, how they can be helpful in communities, and if we can cite any actual DIFs that we've done. I know when I was here, I think it was in 14, we did a DIF with John Hancock on Berkeley and something. I think we did. The eyebrows went up? No? Okay. Maybe that was a different life, or maybe that was a dream. I don't know. So, Arthur, thank you. Introduce yourself, who you are, your affiliation, and then we'll go.
Thanks very much, Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, Councilor Frank Baker, and Councilor Erin Murphy. Thank you so much for inviting us to today's hearing. Pleased to be here. My name's Arthur Jemison. I'm the Chief of Planning and the Director of the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I'll be leading the first part of the discussion. It's my pleasure to introduce the folks sitting next to me who can do it better for themselves, but the CFO and assessor.
Good morning, councilors. Ashley Grafenberger, Chief Financial Officer for the city.
Good morning, councilors. Nick Arnello, I'm the Commissioner of Assessing for the City of Boston.
Excellent. So thanks for having us here today. Just to sort of set the table and begin to talk about what a DIF and a TIF are. It's a tool used by municipal and state governments to stimulate economic development in a targeted geographic area. They can finance development, they can finance infrastructure improvements, and they usually use future tax revenues that are generated by the economic development as the primary source to pay back the investment. Imagine if you were developing a project and it had anticipated state and city new tax revenue that the city doesn't have today. What you basically are doing is borrowing against projected new income from the state, or state taxes, or city taxes, and dedicating that to invest in the project in question. In Massachusetts, because I've been worked with this instrument in 2 other places, it's referred to as a District Increment Financing, or DIF. It's a locally enacted, an action has to take place in this honorable body to vote to do it, but it captures a piece of the incremental tax revenues from new private investment in a specific area and directs them towards a public improvement and or economic development project. It's not a new tax or a special assessment, and it does not increase the municipality's tax rate. It's been used very often. I can get into a lot more detail about it, but it's paid back. It's basically borrowing and then paying back against new income. Usually it's a 30-year term. There's a process of application, but most projects are considered approved when ratified by their local bodies. The way that I want to talk a little bit about a couple of variations on DIFs. I would say that one of the major issues that comes about when you're doing a tax increment financing is whose credit, so to speak, is being used to make the investment. You're borrowing money to invest in something. Where's the credit coming from? In talking about a recent variation, the state of Massachusetts has a program called I-Cubed. I-Cubed program basically is a lot like TIFs, or in Massachusetts, DIFs, or District Improvement Financings. What it does is the city, state, and a development interest will sign a joint venture agreement effectively, and they'll agree to repay the borrowing, and the borrowing will be stood behind by the credit of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This is a way that the project gets what they call credit enhancement, allowing the project to get a reasonably low interest rate. One of the key issues with tax increment financing is that often people will present a great project, it'll have a lot of feasibility, but then the credit markets will look at it and say, well, this is a somewhat almost, and they'll say this about things that might surprise you in terms of just how certain they are. Oh, this is a very risky investment. I'd like to have the state or the city's backing. I'd like to have their credit enhancement to make the financing work. So I-Cubed is a program that allows cities, the state, and the developer to joint venture and then use the Commonwealth's credit. Maybe just to talk a little bit about the way, and this is something that's best summarized by our CFO.
Can I break in quick?
Sure.
So the I-Cube is the state version of this?
Yes.
Okay.
I-Cubed is the state version of this.
And it's better for them to have their credit on the line than us?
Well, actually, I'd probably say, Councilor Baker, it's better for us in some ways, but I'd like to talk about that for a second,
Okay.
because it's a great question. The Commonwealth credit is good, just like the city of Boston's, but the key thing to think about is there's a lot of financing costs, and they don't seem like they're going to be a lot when you start, but when you really begin to add them up, they're significant. When you are doing one of these programs, by way of example, there's a joint venture agreement between the developer, the city, and the state. There's all the lawyers it takes to draft that. The credit worthiness of the project is rigorously evaluated, and then the state's credit comes into play. But the state's credit comes into play after the developer's credit and the city's credit comes into play. So the reason that this instrument is popular is often because some cities that may have a different credit rating than Boston, would benefit significantly from having the state's credit in play. The recent history of Boston using these instruments is I guess I'd say we haven't used them. That's the short answer. The long answer is we haven't used them because our credit as a city over the last 20 years has been very, very good. And again, the assessor and CFO will be here to talk about that in more detail. So what we typically do, and I can cite a few examples, in the cases of the redevelopments of two very large public housing developments in the city, where the housing authority would come to the city and say, we'd like to use these instruments to finance and make this project larger. Bunker Hill, for example, or Mary Ellen McCormick. The city's response to that was to say, well, listen, we have access to credit markets with a AAA credit rating. We can borrow significant capital under our general obligation bond program, and then we can make our capital investment in the project, and then we can bring that to a negotiating table with the state and say, we'll invest in these things on this schedule with our own money. State, will you agree to invest in these things with tax credits and other resources on this schedule? And together, we'll accomplish the assignment along with the developer. That's the way that the city's done things recently, in part because of all the additional transaction costs that come from doing these other methods, and the fact that the city's strength in borrowing being as strong as it is. So the way to think about it is, as we approach some of the exciting opportunities, one of which I'm going to learn more about today in Roxbury, another of which Dorchester Bay City is making its way through the approval process, is conversations with CFO and assessor about, should we be evaluating I-cubed or the other, or should we also think about just moving a general obligation bond program investment through the capital planning process. Those are the two ways that we're beginning to look at this now. But again, we're trying to make sure that we're just in time to have a plan to support the critical infrastructure that's going to be needed to support the Dorchester Bay City project, and I think hopefully other projects in Roxbury and elsewhere. But that's a little bit about TIFs and DIFs. I did want to share one more set of examples. You have the benefit of having Accordia here today. Accordia is going to present some material that we looked at together on Monday in preparation for this hearing that talks about the specifics of the Dorchester Bay City site and its developments, but to highlight a few places that DIF has been used recently. Worcester City Square, if anyone's visited, my team has wants me to not talk as much about Worcester as I do, but Worcester has been making a lot of improvements in its downtown, and City Square is an example of it. They used DIF to finance that. Quincy has used it recently in Quincy Center. I think many of us have probably taken our kids or other people's kids to or both to Somerville Assembly Row to see my kids like the Lego over there. But more importantly, that entire development was financed in part using a district improvement financing. Downtown Brockton has also used it, and Union Square is using this instrument. So our competitors and partners in the region are using this instrument in part because it has specific financial benefits to them. They may also benefit us, but again, the recent history of financing large infrastructure projects in the city has been to use our general obligation borrowing and our AAA credit rating. And with that initial offering, I'd love to ask if the CFO and assessor, whose work I've been summarizing hopefully accurately, would like to add some comments or additions to what I've said.
And before you guys go, so mostly for infrastructure improvements, so the DIF in Somerville, you could say, went towards roadways, sidewalks, and that sort of stuff?
Goes towards roadways, sidewalks. It can also be used to fund aspects of the development. I mean, it's a very flexible resource.
Okay.
But
okay.
Primarily for infrastructure. The state's been very specific about the desire to use it for public infrastructure that supports development, so that there's sort of a bright line between what's the public sector and what's the private sector. Again, this instrument is great. and it can be used to great effect all around the city.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to go next, Ashley or Nick?
Thank you, councilors. Thank you, Arthur. So nothing, I think Arthur really captured it really well. I have nothing beyond that to add. I think as we're thinking about development opportunities throughout the city, it is an interesting tool to have in our toolbox. DIFs are an interesting tool for us to consider. As we well know, the city has historically leveraged its GO bond capacity to do capital investments, infrastructure capacity, infrastructure investments throughout the city. So this would be a different tool for us to explore in the right circumstance. So I think it's something interesting for us to continue to talk about. I tend to think about wanting to make sure we are not identifying, that we are identifying the right financing mechanism for the right project. So, you know, happy to continue the conversation as we're talking about the specific project in Dorchester or in Roxbury to see if there's an appropriate nexus there. You know, the challenge with some of these mechanisms is that it can and does take away capacity from the rest of the city, and you know, policymakers can make the decision to carve capacity away and focus it in one particular area. But I think that is why we have traditionally preferred to view these types of investments, you know, amongst citywide trade-offs to make sure we're evaluating needs across the city and giving ourselves the flexibility to apply our property tax and our borrowing capacity across the city rather than carving it out and locking it up for one particular part of the city. But again, it's an interesting tool that we can explore and have in our toolbox if the right solution presents itself.
Thank you.
Good morning. My colleagues have both so eloquently described all of the parameters that I don't have an enormous amount to add. I think maybe I'll address a couple of points that are just like minor clarification, and also to maybe make it a little easier to understand the acronyms that are being thrown around and some of the confusion. And I think a question that you had initially, Councilor Baker, about whether we've used this tool before. So as Arthur was mentioning, locally in Massachusetts, this tool that we have is called a DIF. And it's, in essence, a bonding tool and a way for us to generate money. Nationally, there are similar programs in other states, and other states call that program a TIF. And so a lot of times, if people are looking up information on this kind of program, they'll see stuff referring to a TIF. In Massachusetts, we have a completely different program called a TIF. That's tax increment financing. And so that is basically a tool to set up a agreement with a developer that's going to bring jobs and their jobs rules, and it allows, basically someone says they're going to invest a certain amount in a particular building in a project, and the city's going to get investment in that project and then also a bunch of jobs from it. And then we construct an agreement around that says like, okay, well, if you do A, B, C, and D, then you can have this discount in your future tax value for a
So the
short
TIF
period of
is
time.
more of a straight up tax deal where we may go easy on someone building something on the front end, knowing that we'll recoup the taxes in the back end, where a DIF is more about the improvements that we can actually improve areas.
Yeah.
So a TIF would be more of a benefit for the company, a DIF would, or company or builder or whatever, and then the DIF can potentially be more of a broader benefit.
Yeah, and you know, the reason behind both of them is to have a benefit for the city, right? And so both of them you're supposed to enter into in kind of a means-tested way of, you know, this thing would not happen but for this investment by the city, and it will make the city better as a result. And so TIFs focus on jobs and, you know, improvement in a particular building on a smaller scale. And a DIF is a way to borrow money to add infrastructure to an area that the city might not otherwise be able to fund, and that otherwise might not be able to fund part is really, I think, the important point to kind of hit in this conversation. And as Ashley was mentioning, it's always healthy and good for us to have conversations about all of the available tools so we know what's out there and what we can use, and then we can figure out how to use those in the best way possible. Boston has thankfully been in a really good place in its recent history that we haven't had a need to use this tool in order to borrow money, and we've been able to borrow for infrastructure through our normal bonding capacity. And so some of these things, the conversation is really like, where do we think the city should be making investments, and in what areas the city should be making
Are you
investments?
open for ideas, Nick?
I
That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, we can definitely have lots of conversations about that, I'm sure. And then once we identify those areas, how do we fund those investments?
Yeah.
And so the diff part of that conversation is about the funding mechanism and not about the investment mechanism.
Okay. Thank you. I just have a couple questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. Can you use the term geo bonds? Is that different from a transportation bond or any other type of bond? Is that just?
Yeah, so those are our general obligation bonds. That's
Oh.
how we fund the city's capital plan.
So the capital is all, we go out and get bonds, pay for it, and then slowly buy it down. And also, I have to push back a little bit on the city the city capturing for one particular area, and I'll go to the second docket number here for a second. You're looking at an area that traditionally was, we hear a lot about when 95 was blocked and the devastation that left when they cleared out certain neighborhoods. Well, this neighborhood here with 93 was not blocked. So we have neighborhoods that, people in 1950, we're walking out of our back doors and walking over the water. In 1953, 54, we now have the highway on top of us. We have the train tracks and additional train tracks on top of us. So I would say, for the neighborhood that's being, for lack of a better term, tricked out, we should be able to capture that and keep those dollars in that neighborhood. And we're not looking for all of it, we're looking for a percentage of it. I mean, I honestly would rather, instead of getting into a long, drawn-out, bond that will be controlled by other entities that'll be spent the way those entities want. I'd much prefer 10% every year going right into a Dorchester-based, fund that could help us in Dorchester, whatever we wanted to do in Dorchester, but that's probably not an option. If it was an option, that's what I'd like to go towards, but I think we're looking more at a bond sort of thing. Go and say, we want the city or the state or whoever to take out a bond, and more than transportation, because the city doesn't own a lot of transportation in this area of where I am. But how do we define infrastructure? I think we should start to define infrastructure as our people. Our people don't have jobs, so let's spend money on job training. Our people are suffering mental health issues, our kids, so let's invest in a field house. And then we can start talking about how we connect neighborhoods across and along. So that's just a little bit of my going-ons. So with that, I'd like to hear from the good counsel from District 7 on her ideas, and if we can figure out, because Roxbury has a lot of development going on. I think it's down by the police station, huge amounts. So how do we capture that? Same thing, how do we capture that revenue for what we're going to be doing in the future? So with that, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we can all agree here that the need is there, and this is a tool that is in place for a reason, right? A different way of using a small increment to make changes in a different structure that otherwise is not being implemented. So we could do it through bonds, or we could do it through TIFs, or we could do it through the general funds. And then when communities get historically disenfranchised or historically ignored, then there are tools like this in place. There's a reason, and we just so happen to be fortunate that it's already a thing in the state, on the state level. So I know this is not a working session, but I'm really interested in asking your ideas, either Chief or Chief, if you can give me sort of the layout of what the next steps would be in terms of looking at like possible projects For mine, of course, I laid it out very general in terms of the disinvestment in Roxbury, the need in Roxbury, but also just sort of like the overlap between the jobs and the lack of building equity by way of real estate. And so we can all agree, I can go on and on and on about the numbers. Roxbury being the poorest, second in the lowest amount of home ownership in Boston, number one with the highest making less than 15,000. Number one making about 15,000. Number one making less than 150,000. And then we know that if we look in the past 50 to 70 years, Roxbury specifically is historically the most disenfranchised community. And then when you look at Dorchester too, there are pockets of areas that could benefit from something like this. And besides, we're asking for, as the chair mentioned, we're asking for a very small portion. The tool exists for a reason. And so the idea then is, how do we collaborate again? And what do you think is the best method, the best way to approach this so that we can do this collectively?
So, with permit, through the chair to Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, appreciate the question. I think the maybe a way of thinking about it is, a way of thinking about it would be to say, if there's a project in your neighborhood that could use this instrument, and you said 10% of the tax value of this is equal to X amount of money, we'd like to borrow that at an interest rate, and then invest it in Nubian Square or P3 or one of the other large-scale projects, or maybe even another project that is going to emerge. I think, frankly, Nick and Ashley would say, hey, if we do this with a TIF, we have a lot more lawyers, and we'll probably get charged 9% interest. If we do it on our general obligation bonds, we'll probably get charged 5% interest. Wouldn't we rather pay for more stuff to happen in the neighborhood than pay for lawyers and the additional interest cost? So I think in terms of the way to think about the benefit of using a GEO approach versus using one of these other instruments is there's an interest rate benefit. There's an interest rate benefit that's the primary benefit. The one good thing about those instruments is it brings the state to the table. And so I should mention that, in my day-to-day work, I had some pretty high-level conversations with the Commonwealth recently, highlighted both the projects we're working on in Roxbury as well as Dorchester Bay City. And I feel comfortable that we're going to be able to get them to the table to make any kind of investments that we need them to make over the next several years. A lot of work to be done, but I think the interest and partnership is there. I make that point to say that's one of the great things about the instruments is it brings the state explicitly to the table. But I do think that you'll get better value from Ashley and Nick in terms of interest rates and creditworthiness. And they'll bring the same probably amount of money to the table through the general obligation.
So
approach.
you're saying through just a straight up city says, we're going to get a $100 million bond to do this, and this, and stay away from the diff altogether?
I actually would propose something slightly different. I think you should, pardon me, not my place to say that. It'd be my suggestion that in both of the cases that you're speaking about, that you make a special request of the capital plan to make an investment against the scope of work that I think Dick's in the audience, but Accordia is going to propose. And then Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, as the development ideas that you're talking about grow to fruition, I think bringing a proposal that says, I would like there to be a capital investment of this amount in this part of Roxbury that will allow this development to occur. I think that's a way to approach it. Again, you guys run the capital program, so I don't want to say more about the program you guys run.
Can you talk about that a little bit, Ashley?
Sure. So
Please.
I think to piggyback off of what Arthur was saying, I think what's really important as we advance this discussion is identifying what exactly it is we are trying to fund with this mechanism or through our capital program. If there are infrastructure, investments like streets or, the things that the city typically invests in that are needed in these particular areas, I think it's our opinion that it is best pursued through our capital program and through our regular GO bond, because we have the top bond rating, lowest cost of capital for us, simplest, demonstrated results in investing through our capital program. So I think it really matters what we're looking to fund. And then I think what I've heard Councilor Anderson talk about is also sort of like beyond the infrastructure needs of a particular area, wanting to capture some benefit for things that aren't exactly, hard infrastructure, programming, other things that you would like to see sort of reinvested back in that community. We can't bond for programs or people or things like that. We can bond for the hard infrastructure. So I think it kind of depends on what it is we're looking to do, and that really matters, and how we pursue what tool. Some of the things that aren't necessarily infrastructure are going to be best pursued through our operating budget, right? And as we're seeing development grow, property tax grow, our budget grows, we have ability to.
Can I just make a point, and then we'll go over to you?
Sure.
We're looking for surety, right? You're talking about things that if you're talking about as a district council 7 and 3, you're talking about an 8-year commitment from us to chase you guys around to make sure that you're spending the money with that the way we want it. That isn't something, I can speak for myself, that isn't something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to come up with a plan, money coming in, this is what we're going to spend it on, and we're going to pay you back with the tax money that's coming in, because my neighborhood's being tricked out. We want some benefit for it. Otherwise, we don't want the development. So we'll stay there and come back to Councilor Anderson.
Thank you.
And Councilor Worrell is here, the vice chair of the committee. Thank you, Councilor Worrell.
I can appreciate your angle and what you're explaining, what's fiscally responsible in terms of saving money or in terms of preserving our ratings. However, when you look at how the practices have been implemented thus far in terms of who is prioritized, and again, like, these conversations can get sticky, because then when we're talking about historically disenfranchised communities, we, of course, are not talking about the people sitting at the table. We're talking about what's happened before we got here. And so with this new administration, I think that our mayor wants to do the right thing. A very hard task, a very difficult balance to create, from coming all the way from extreme poverty to bringing something up or building quality of life in a community like Roxbury or Dorchester or Mattapan. It's going to take decades to repair. Understandable. However, because we don't necessarily have certain advances in terms of speeding up the process with how capital projects are prioritized in these communities. Last year, we saw that Roxbury got a lot of, park improvements, street improvements, and I, for one, of course, appreciate that. The school in South Boston getting a renovation, a brand new school, beautiful, amazing. But then we saw that Mattapan only got like $50 million. District 3 and District 4 only got like $54 million. So, of course, for one, coming in new and figuring out budget and understanding it for the first time, I immediately said, this looks like an overlap from the previous years. This is not Mayor Wu saying, I don't want to invest in Mattapan or Roxbury. We know that the budget is coming, but we also know that it's not going to be much different, again, because it takes time to be able to propel that into the future. We think this is a tool, and we also believe that the people in Roxbury and Mattapan and Dorchester is worth that additional 4%. That because the city does so well, that this would be responsible. The argument may be, maybe it's not the right time. Let's give it some time before we do that. But this is exactly the right time. Right now, when the city is doing so well, when we understand and we have very progressive people on the council, and we have amazing people in the administration that believe in this, that believe in fixing the harm, now is the time to seize the moment, use tools that we have available to us in order to make some of these repairs. And yes, we can't build out or plan for programmatic ideas in capital, so DIFs obviously would be a great idea, a great tool to use. And even when we do look at different projects, that process to asking for capital is not always very streamlined, because it is essentially up to the mayor. The council have no say. So here we are. If we can get to the conversation about moving forward, what that would look like, I think I'm determined, certainly because I filed it first, and Council Baker had already had it in planning. I'm ready to move forward with the conversation about how do we actually execute it.
So, through the chair, to Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, I guess I would say one of the downsides of it is, and I'm happy to share what the next steps would be. I think this is probably part of it. One of the downsides of it is that you do end up taking the growth of the city and dividing it up by neighborhood, and that has a lot of risks associated with it. If we begin, and I know respectfully, I understand Councilor Baker's earlier
Sorry,
comment.
point of clarification, that
Sure.
if we do this in silos and compartmentalize these projects, that there's a downside. Exactly what is the downside?
The downside is that Roxbury would have the growth that Roxbury has. South Boston would have the growth that South Boston has. West Roxbury would have the growth that West Roxbury has. It would divide the tax base up, and the incremental growth that happens in that district would accrue to that district and stay in that district and wouldn't go outside of it. That's a risk that district improvement financing does
Doesn't the city
have.
still have enough responsibility to build equity? So somehow implementing metrics that measures exactly how to balance that out. For example, if there's at least 10 diffs out, and I understand how we set precedents then makes an example of everybody else is going to say, I want one, right? And so I hear you on that, because that big pot then has to be shared for the entire city. But that big pot should always have the equitable lens, right? So for example, if every town got a diff, but because Roxbury has less development and Ed Flynn's, the president's council has a whole bunch of development, billionaires building there, right? I mean, I'm assuming, but these buildings look amazing when I drive by. And say that those monies are more for that district. You're saying there's going to be some sort of disproportionate there. Like, how can Ed Flynn's will get more investment than Roxbury would, having less development or having...
I mean, unfortunately, that is one of the things that happens when we divide up the tax base and the growth in the tax base, or more accurately, a significant portion of the growth of the tax base. That's what happens, and I think
But that's how linkage works, though. It has like a radius of catchment area that can be spent on.
And then it goes into, linkage goes into the Neighborhood Housing Trust and the Workforce Trust, where a panel of people appointed to represent the whole city make allocation decisions. I think that's important, just like the council makes decisions and participates in the budget process.
Which is to the discretion of the mayor, though. And I mean, I think Mayor Wu is fair. I think she'll do the right thing. Same with the bonds. I think she's fair. I think that the big bucket would be the bonds, the capital, for her to then distribute equitably and looking at, you have diffs, you have diffs, you have diffs, but you have a bigger diffs, and maybe then now I know to prioritize here, right? Because that's the responsibility, is to ensure that all citizens of Boston is treated or taken care of equitably.
Of course it is, but I think what happens is if, let's say that Dorchester Bay City is approved, it develops huge new state and city revenues, and those state and city revenues are staying in that area. Now that may benefit that area, but it's not going to necessarily going to benefit that's a significant amount of growth to benefit a single area. What I don't want to do in our conversation today is something that I think even in the way I've introduced this,
Yeah.
we're one city, we make one city decisions together, we have the wealth of the whole city to invest. I think together, the council and the executive branch, there's definitely enough room in what the city generates to make the kind of investment that's going to make Roxbury even better, the kind of investment it's going to take to make Dorchester Bay work, and attract state and other investment to both areas. But I guess what I'm trying to illustrate, and hopefully it's been clear, is that there are trade-offs to dividing the growth of the tax base up, because it means that some of those conversations about equitable growth get put on right in front of us, and it can be difficult.
It's a sorry,
No, that's
Chair.
okay. That's
Last
okay.
comment for this round. It's a challenging conversation because you can say that there are funds going into one pot, and that the person responsible, that collectively we will be responsible enough to work together and come to a consensus that is advantageous to everyone in an equitable sense. However, what we see as proof, evidence, is that is just not the case. And so tools like diffs or TIFs or all these other, maybe another one will be like KIFs, I don't know. It'll be, we'll start making up a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like, oh boy, we're going into the right direction.
Right.
We're doing equitable things, we're doing beautiful things, we're a rich city, we're gonna fix it. I wish people would just stop creating new stuff. Stop reinventing the wheel.
Right.
I'm a very pragmatic person, or at least I think technical thinker. However, meanwhile, I think there's room for us to do this responsibly and reasonably and say, yeah, you have a really good point. And I want to work with you to make sure that the big bucket is distributed equitably. But then this tool here could handle some of the things that are missed or to catch up, because there's that overlap, right? Then there's the point that no community is a community unless it's economically integrated, right? And so when you look at communities like Roxbury, Mattapan, or Dorchester, it's not that we're South Boston and we're all project kids, or that we are Black and in Roxbury and we don't pull ourselves by the bootstraps. Rather that we are not integrated, and so municipally or governmental-wise, we are not advocating, and we're not heard, right? And we have immigrant populations condensed in our areas who cannot vote or be integrated. We also have a lot of such affordable housing or restricted housing that concentrates poverty in certain pockets of these areas. So there's no mixed income going around, and when we look at it economically, the tax in our areas work in the same way. Roxbury is not invested in. So we can't have that conversation as though we can continue to do the right thing, because we'll never be able to catch up. It'll just take way too long. So I think that's why I'm saying to you, please allow, be open, allow us to talk about this.
Of course.
And I think there's a way. I think we can do it. I don't think we need to be extreme about it. I think we can pilot small, projects and figure it out. Thank you.
We'll come back to you also. I already acknowledge you. Councilor Erin Murphy.
Thank you. So, as an at-large city councilor, I have that lens, right, and that balance that you have to always juggle between, you know, neighborhoods and districts. And we are a city of neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods make up our city. We're not a city alone, and then neighborhoods separate, right? So that is the job, I think, also of the way the council is made up with district and at-large councilors to really have that, you know, lens, which is so important. And when you said capacity would be taken away, right, and carved out, and I get that your jobs are to be risk averse, right? You have to keep our bonds and our money in our city, so I do appreciate that. But, you know, when we build a new police station in East Boston, or we have a new high school in Fenway, or we're breaking ground for a new fire station at Meeting House Hill, those are in particular neighborhoods, but the whole city benefits, right? When new restaurants and businesses are investing in Hyde Park, I live in Dorchester, I'm driving down River Street more, right? I'm going into those neighborhoods. So I have to push back a little on this. It would only benefit certain neighborhoods or, you know, certain businesses, because we are a city of a whole. So if you're putting investment in Kosciuszko Circle, which it may be an urban myth, but it's like the busiest rotary in the country. Like, so many people drive through that, not just Dorchester residents, not just South Boston residents. You know, you see people coming home, you know, getting on the expressway to go to Hyde Park, like all different neighborhoods. So I think we have to acknowledge that we are a city of neighborhoods, and that investing in those who have been historically left out. And like Councilor Fernandez-Anderson said, and I'm going to push back a little on that, you know, we're going to do the right thing, but in the budget hearing last year, I heard you say a lot that we didn't do the right thing. So why are you saying that we will if we didn't, right? And will we? I don't know. We haven't seen the budget yet. So that idea of not using this tool, but then we would have to get the votes on the council, or would have to use political power if we can come together as a council to then, and it's probably too late, to have the mayor even put it in the capital budget or put it in the, you know, other, these types of projects. So it is a different tool that we do have, and I do appreciate that we're having this conversation, and I just want to just put that point out there that it's so important to not think that we're separate, even though we are different neighborhoods, right? That we are better off, especially with, you know, the schools investing a whole lot of money in this Green New Deal. We will be building new schools, not in every neighborhood, only some will get them, but it will benefit the whole city, right? When we put a new fire station or a new police station, or we invest in development in different parts of the city, I do believe we all benefit from that. So we have to use the tools that we have at our disposal and not think of it as, well, you got it, so you didn't. That if it overall benefits the city, then I think we've all benefited from it. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Okay, we've also been joined by Council President Ed Flynn. Councilor Burrell, questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And just so you know, we're in the overall sort of what a diff is and how to use it, and then we'll get into a particular diff in the next conversation. So just
Okay.
We have two dockets going on.
Awesome, thank you. I'm very interested in this conversation just because, as you may or may not know, District 4, over like the last 5 years, when it comes to the capital plan, had the least tax dollars allocated to it over 5 years. And this tool, or any tool that can help get more programming or just investments into the neighborhood, or increase dollars to build up, you know, our parks, our schools, our just libraries, is something that we truly need for the community and for the district. And I'm not sure how we get there, like in terms of like creating responsible policy to put around a diff to make sure that the corrective action is is happening in order to uplift these communities that has been underinvested for many, many years. But this is something that is extremely important to me and something that I fight for in every capital budget. So if we can't get it on the capital budget, then I truly believe that this is something that we need to start to take a deeper dive and look at to make sure that we're doing it in a responsible way, to make sure that we're providing corrective actions to communities of color. So just looking forward to the continued conversation. And I guess my one question is, if it's not a DIF and it's not a TIF, you know, how do we revitalize Mattapan Square or Common Square? Because a lot of the plans that I see coming in, we don't have the dollars, right? In order to execute the Plan Mattapan, like those plans need dollars in order to subsidize the affordable housing or the affordable home ownership. So it's like, if we're not using these tools, then what are we using in order to get the investments into these communities?
Through the chair to Councilor Royal, and I'll try to address some of the other questions as well. So I want to make sure that I'm remembering this process correctly. The capital plan is the place where I think we can make significant investments to support, by way of example, the Mattapan Square proposals we've made, all the public infrastructure, the roadways, the sidewalks. Often it's a project, a specific development project that sort of galvanizes interest in making the kind of accompanying infrastructure investments. And I'm reminded, for example, of the Crosstown project, which at that time really galvanized the community to make an investment at a key intersection. I know that there's Dorchester Bay today. There's significant opportunity in Mattapan Square. There's significant opportunities on P3 and in Nubian. And the key question is, can we make capital investments using GO-funded activities through the capital plan? I guess I would sort of defer to my colleagues here with a question, maybe to the benefit of the whole discussion. The way that councilors make their input about what should be in the capital plan is crucial. Advocating on behalf of your neighborhoods, or in your case, Councilor Murphy, on behalf of the sort of city, to say this project needs an accompanying GO investment for it to be executed. I guess what I'm hearing sounds like, well, pardon me, I would like to make sure everybody in the public knows what the process is, so that we can understand that. Because if you're feeling like projects in your neighborhoods that need GO support, GO capital investment support to happen, we need to talk about that. I think certainly the projects we're talking about, at least one of the ones that will be talked about in the next section, would need its capital investment in either the fiscal year following this one or the one following that. But what is the process through which councilors request capital investments in their neighborhoods?
Yeah, thanks, Chief Jemison. So we've met with all of you over the last several months to hear budget priorities. And that can really run the gamut of things you want to see happening in the operating budget, or things, particular capital projects that you all have in your district that you want to uplift. We also work really closely with all of the city departments who are implementing these projects. They bring those forward in the form of capital requests. And so we really spend the first couple months of the calendar year getting input from and requests from departments, hearing from the counselors, and hearing from other stakeholders across the city about the needs in the plan. We do a 5-year plan. There's obviously, in addition to financial constraints on the plan, there's human capacity constraints and how much we as a city can actually do in a particular year. So we're balancing those needs against those both financial and human capacity constraints as we're building and deciding what we will borrow for in the upcoming year and what we plan to borrow for over the course of the 5 years. So maybe a little bit more than you were asking, but really we really like to hear from you all as we're soliciting budget priorities and departments and other stakeholders as we're building the plan.
I have another question. Yeah, and I guess to speak to, because when I see the BPDA like plan Mattapan, it still, what it asks for is more investments in order for the plan to be executed, right? Like you need more subsidies in order to get the affordable housing. Then I hear from the community that we need more home ownership, but then I hear from the developers that they only do rentals, right? So it's like what are we using, or what investments are we using or providing to developers in order to give to the community what they're asking for? And is a DIF and a TIF one of those tools that can be used to help bring the type of home ownership or housing needs that we're looking for as a district?
The capital, GO capital or DIF or TIF money are basically the same. They're driven by new tax revenues, right? So if the new tax revenues come from, we're going to have 1,000 new residents of Mattapan, and those residents are all going to pay new taxes to the city, pay new taxes to the state, capturing that and then invest. I mean, just to explain how, I think you know as well as I do how it functions, taking those revenues and investing them in a developer's proposal to develop housing, for sale housing, that's absolutely an eligible use of the funds. As I think I was saying before you arrived, you can, the difference is GO debt is less expensive and there's less transaction costs than one of the other things. But the key thing is doing it around supporting an individual project is the key to it. It can certainly be used to support, those funds can certainly be used to support all the public infrastructure that might support a for sale affordable development in Mattapan, as it could be in Roxbury or any other part of the city. We are with you 100% on the need to pivot to more home ownership, specifically affordable home ownership. Too many people have been locked out of the ability to get the wealth creation that comes from home ownership, and that's why hopefully you're seeing my colleague Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing, and others pivot our focus to affordable home ownership because it's essential. But there's certainly going to be developments that can do it. The key thing I think we have to do is, whether it's through the capital plan or through DIF or I-cubed, is say to the development interest, we have resources we're ready to put on the table to get things to happen, because again, projects galvanize neighborhoods and communities to execute, and having projects come forward is really crucial to making the argument.
Got it. Thank you.
That's right.
Yes, please, thank you. Firstly, I think to Councilor Murphy's, thank you, Chair, to Councilor Murphy's point. So I want to go on record to make sure that I'm consistent across the board in terms of my message. I believe that we have a good mayor who has good intentions, who is perfectly competent and capable of executing an equitable budget. I also believe that it's a hard task, and I am not qualified to judge her because I'm not in her shoes to be able to say, you can do, you can't, you shouldn't, you doing, this is what you feel in your heart. What I will say is that what we see presently, it's years of historic harm, and that will take years to fix. And so in order to propel, practices that I think are equity proven or best practices, you have to be able to begin, and I think we should have to add tools such as this. Communities like Roxbury gets lost in the 5-year plan, right? Because we're waiting for a capital plan to implement itself. And when you look at the budget, specifically, communities of color have not been invested intentionally in the capital plans. What I mean by that is that when you look at capital plans, at least even last year as well, when you look at the funds, where the money's coming from, there weren't just direct city dollars. There were bonds, there were grants, there were monies that were going to take 5 to 10 years to get in. So in Roxbury, for example, in affluent communities, the dollars were coming directly from the city, so more accessible, quicker to access. and 70%, up to 70% more. Some areas I saw even 80% coming from city dollars. Whereas in Roxbury, for example, 30% was of it, or 40% would come from city dollars. And so that's the intentionality when we look at what we're prioritizing. You can write up a good, beautiful plan, and then it takes us 10 years, but it takes Fenway 2 years, a year to access the money. That's a huge disparity. And so whether intentional or not, whether we're paying attention to how we're doing that, again, it's a conversation that we have to have, and we have to have transparently. Mm-hmm. There, for example, the Community Preservation Act has committees that oversees a plan, and then they tackle specifically preserving historical or cultural landmarks and areas. When you do that, who are you doing it for? Then you have communities or affluent people that gentrify and come in Roxbury as well. Love Highland Park, love my constituents. However, when you have people that are, again, economically integrated, they can better organize and have more resources. They can advocate. Then they can do things like unofficial moratoriums, a pause. They can community preserve, they can get designation for landmark, and then they can get the funds to repair the very communities that belong to Black and brown people, or poor people, poor whites too. Now, who are they doing it for? For themselves, because now they are in the community. So you see this level of, we can repair here, we can do capital here, and you can ask in the budget. So to respond to your comment, Ashley, respectfully, I think that is what you guys want to do, whether or not it's impactful, right? Intention versus impact. How are we actually getting the capital asks in the budget? The response sometimes is, well, how will you do it? To the counselor. And do you have a plan? Do you have the developer? Do you have the architects? Do you have someone who wants to take this on and sustain it in the future or manage it? For example, if I ask for a theater in Roxbury, oh, well, who's going to manage it? Well, isn't that victim blaming to an extent? The poor representative from Roxbury, am asking for a thing to build quality of life in Roxbury to the administration for capital improvements. The responses that my colleagues and myself most of the time gets, and last year, if you look at the capital, I did not get a single thing in that capital project. Did I ask for a whole bunch of things? Of course I did. So then we get into, if I'm not ready, if I don't have the resources, I'm a counselor with no budget, with no discretionary funds to do my job. And then I simply ask at the mercy of the administration. Again, I believe that the administration wants to do the right thing. Then you tell me I need a study. I need to go grab people and consolidate and organize. That's time, that's resource. And I have been doing that. So I look forward and I want to see what my capital asks turn into this year. But respectfully, again, it's a process. Sorry, Chair, for taking so long and explaining that one point, but it's a process and it does not turn out in the way that we want it to. We don't get our asks. So here we are.
And we can come back to you.
Thank you.
Councilor Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the sponsors, to Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, and to Councilor Baker as well. And I know both of these would be impacting your districts as district city councilors. So just want to acknowledge the important work that Councilor Fernandez-Anderson is doing and Councilor Baker as well. So I know the first part of this meeting is basically discussing what a diff is, and then the second part, we're going to ask more specific questions. So I want to highlight and discuss, the importance of a diff, and whether it's in the Roxbury area or it's in the Dorchester area. But Chief, let me ask you this question: how important is it to have state officials, the state government, and residents involved in the process, involved in the discussion, involved in the decision-making. What impact does the state government residents play working closely with district city councils?
Through the chair to Council President Ed Flynn. So, well, obviously, they're both really important. Citizens and councilors that represent them shape the things that we do. But the state, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, has the chance through a series of programs to really increase the value of the investments we make. That's one of the reasons that the IQ program, for example, is really valuable, in that the Commonwealth will join with the city and the city's credit and the developer's credit to credit enhance the whole project. So that's a way that the state's important. I think, again, it's easy for me to think about some of the examples that are here. They could finance the roads, they could finance the changes to the public way or rail stations. All those kinds of things can come out of the combination of state and city investment. But again, citizens are crucial to shaping the way the development works. If it should be taller or it should be wider or smaller or any of those other features. And then they speak through you as you engage with the BPDA and engage with the city budget process.
Thank you, Chief. And just want to acknowledge that, you know, both Council Fernandez Anderson, her district, and Council Baker's district border on my district, so I know how invaluable these colleagues are in this discussion, and know that they're well respected in their district. I guess my point is, it's important that the district councilors have a prominent role, and a prominent, not just a prominent role, but a decision-making role on major decisions that take place, whether those decisions are in Roxbury. City Council Fernandez Anderson should be there, and certainly in Dorchester, Councilor Baker should be there as well. So, is that what you envision also, Chief?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we work hard to make sure that we do that. I know we don't do it. We don't always do it as well as we'd like to, but that's certainly our goal. And I think in structuring anything that's going to invest significant money into a major project in parts of Dorchester or Roxbury or citywide, we strive to have community voices in there and in a decision-making role.
Okay. The only reason I ask is I think that's a critical part, the role of the district council, especially as it relates to economic development, transportation, quality life issues, neighborhood services. Transportation issues, certainly BPDA plays a role, but so doesn't the City of Boston Transportation Department. As a district city councilor, at times I'm having a difficult time working with planners, city planners that decide what they think is best for transportation in my district, even at the expense of economic development, even at the expense of supporting our small businesses that play a critical role in our city. Really, the backbone of our city is these small businesses, and the businesses, they pay huge taxes to Boston, and they should also be at the decision-making table and not to be told what the decision is by certain city planners, what that person thinks is best. It's about moving the economy. It's about working together. It's about listening to district city councilors. I just want to make sure we stress that and understand the importance of the district city councilors, the business community, but also listening to the community as well, making sure that the city planners hear their feedback.
Through the chair to Councilor Flynn, Council President Flynn, I'm very aware of the issue you're speaking about, generally and also specifically. And I think we've taken an action at the board recently to make sure that there's enough time for the specific matters you're concerned about to be, for there to be a full briefing on them to you and other members of the delegation. So I think I know that a consensus was reached about a pilot, and we're pilot program, I should say. A pilot can mean a lot of different things at this table. And so I'm eager to sit down with you and other members of the delegation to sort of talk about it. But I think we've definitely heard you and other members' concerns.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. And I respect the work you're doing, Chief. I respect the work your team is doing on the transportation team. I just want to make sure that everybody in city government knows how important a district city councilor is to any process, whether it's development, transportation, quality of life, public safety. A district city councilor has to be always at that decision-making table. Nothing against my at-large councilors. I have respect for all four of them. But as district city councilors, you know, we can't pass the buck. We're responsible for the good and the bad, along with the mayor. That's why I'm stressing this point, and I don't mean to just keep on talking about it, but I just want to make sure my point was clear. But thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me an extra couple of minutes.
I just want to talk a little bit about my experience with the capital budget plan, and I'll cite a particular playground. I got elected in 2011, started my term in 2012, got called up to Jones Hill shortly after that to discuss a playground, Downer Park.
Downer Street, yeah.
That was on my very first list budget request, so that year, it made, or it might have been the year after, it made feasibility. So the mayor gets to hold up that book, it's on the capital budget plan, feasibility. That's just the first step. You've got to literally be like a dog on a bone and go back the next year and say, okay, we're at feasibility, this is still important to me, now let's go for a planning study. And then the second year is planning study, and then it's then the third year would be fund the design, and then fourth, fifth year would be find the contractor, fund the contract. So if you're hitting everything right, you're 5 years, right? So for me to get infrastructure that I want at Columbia Point, which is the field house, which is job training, which is being able to connect my neighborhood, a neighborhood that was left behind. They put up walls for us. It was for people to get through our city. For us, it was a wall. And I don't have the stamina for 10 more years to follow. Okay, can I please go and please, and can you a diff, a $100 million bond that's being directed. I don't have to play the role of a district city council, or the person behind me doesn't have to play the role of a district city council of begging to get from feasibility to planning study to design. In every year, and I'm through my fourth mayor right now, so this isn't about the first one or the last one. Every year the mayor holds up, you're on the Capitol. Yeah, but that's the first part of Capitol. So to answer some of the questions, you've got to be a dog on a bone, and if you put something in the Capitol this year, you have to make sure it's a priority, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. One thing and that's just my experience, I'm not looking for my community, after we've been tricked out, I'm not looking for my community to have to come over to whoever is the elected or the bureaucrat in charge at the time and beg. We need some help. We've been affected. Even though we might not come in under that affected communities, we've been affected. So a little bit of homework for my good colleague from District 7 would be, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, get a handle of all the projects that are in your district. That could be helpful with the BPTA, so you can figure out where we're a right diff, or what are we gonna determine as a diff area that will give dollars back? Or can a diff be, so could we do P3 here, and then another big project here, and another big project there? Does it need to be continuous? Do you know?
He's gonna give testimony. And
Yeah, so we'll save that
He might-
question
he
for you.
might
So,
actually- sorry, pardon me.
I'm trying to help out my colleague here. What should she be doing first steps in identifying the projects that would be ready for diff? What has scale, and then what are we looking to do with that?
So I'll take all the homework over here.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate it. We have meetings coming up.
Yeah.
We've identified, we've met.
Yeah.
We have a huge project, anti-displacement, Roxbury, and trust me, we have a whole database on this thing.
Okay.
But projects will galvanize it, but Counselor, I've had a chance to talk to everybody up there, although, Brian, I think our meeting is getting calendared now. I've had a chance to talk to everybody up there. I know you're very clear about the projects that are important to you.
Yeah.
To me, directly and otherwise. But the projects help galvanize and drive the capital plan. I hear you loud and clear about the time it takes. I think you're talking about big projects that each need a lot. We'll make sure that we're prioritizing them. I mean, again, in our store, we'll make sure of that, and I think you guys can speak for yourselves, but we hear you, and I think that I would like to accept the challenge of showing that we can get our GO program to do a lot of the things that you want these diffs and TIFs and other instruments to do. And I think we're committed to line up and get and show you that we can do it. And we're also committed to look at them. I know, for example, we've taken hard looks at I-cubed in the assessor and CFO area. And
Is
there's ways-
IQ all, again, the traditional infrastructure, roads and?
Yes.
And, yeah.
With the state's credit behind it, we're committed to look at that too. So at least I'm committing on maybe on our behalf that we'll take a hard look at it.
Okay.
So I want you to take away from this that we are open to what you're saying. We believe we can show you a product that can be as responsive as those. And if we can't, we're happy to look at the other things you've described.
And a particular question here, my colleague had talked about a theater. In terms of capital, our capital is pretty much, again, we're back to streets, sidewalks, parks, libraries. A theater, the way I would go in Arthur, so that would be in P3, the neighborhood would advocate, we want you to build a P3, and then we want you, P3, to build a theater. So how do we use monies to help that developer out because building a theater is you're building, you have no idea how it's gonna be paid for or who's gonna run it or whatever it is. But if it's built, people would step up to run it, and so.
So I think through to the chair, to members of the committee, I would say that if I know the theater about which the council is speaking, in Nubian Square, adjacent to a development that Richard Taylor is leading, there's a theater proposal, and we've been talking about how to capitalize that theater.
Yeah.
Instruments like this could help that happen.
Yeah.
I think, again, we want to take as our homework the ability to show you how the GO can support that, or show you how we'll look at one of the other instruments and present the trade-offs. But I think we think we've got a competitive case to make to you about the way we can use city capital, accepting the challenge.
Thank you, Chief. Does anybody have any questions for this board here? No, I think we're good. Okay, so we're going to go to the next board. If you guys want to stay that would be good.
I would love it if you could stay. These are panelists, not public testimony,
Yeah.
so we're not completed, we're not done.
Yeah, so maybe if you stay for this panelist and Kevin,
Just a
we'll get into
couple
Kevin
people.
after that.
Thank you so much.
So-
I'll keep staying for a little bit.
On
You guys
Zoom,
have to go.
yeah, thank you. On Zoom, we have Philip Banash. Barash, Bridget Wallace, and Lisa is sitting here. So I don't know who's going to go. Philip, you're all smiles up there. You going first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to go first, if that's all right with my colleagues. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much to this committee for for facilitating such a thoughtful discussion. I've learned a great deal about the mechanics, the peculiarities, the merits, and the disadvantages of diffs through this discussion, and I'm walking away enlightened. I think my purpose today is to speak a little bit about the background for the idea of implementing or conceptualizing a Roxbury diff. So I won't be in the mechanics. I'll say a few things about how, in parallel with what the council, the chief of planning are thinking, a group of stakeholders in Roxbury has also been exploring the notion of a diff. So again, my name is Philip Barish. I'm an urban planner. In 2019 and 2020, I had an opportunity to serve as a fellow at the Boston Foundation, where I helped to launch an initiative that convened community groups around the city, such as Asian Community Development Corporation, Bowen Geneva Main Street, Roxbury Cultural District, and others, and thinking about how to support, fund, and build power in communities. Among the many discussions that we've had in that august group was the notion of cultural displacement and cultural placekeeping. The idea that as certain neighborhoods in Boston are undergoing rapid development, their character, their identity, their elders are being buffeted and in some cases displaced. And the public finance value capture tools that were under discussion today, including an alphabet soup of diffs, TIFs, business improvement districts, and other tools, was one way that the group talked about mitigating the cultural displacement, supporting self-determined community goals, and reinvesting in the social infrastructure of communities. I think it's worthwhile to point out, though district improvement financing and TIFs are ordinarily used for gray infrastructure, they can also be used to support softer infrastructure goals. Artists' housing, for instance, vibrant commercial Main Street, playgrounds, schools, etc. I'll also just mention one other conceptual thing about a diff before ceding the space to my colleague Bridget. I think there's often a kind of a conceptual adversarial relationship between real estate development and community interest. If set up and regulated appropriately, a diff can actually align the incentives of private development, the interests of the community, and the desires and responsibilities of city councilors. So I'm really gratified that this idea that germinated in 2019 is now being seriously considered by the council and by staff, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is Bridget Wallace ready?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Bridget. If you
Hi, good morning.
Tell us who you are and your affiliation, please, and you can go.
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is Bridget Wallace, and I am a local Roxbury resident. urban planner, social entrepreneur, also was part of the initiative that Philip mentioned, Place Leadership Network. And I and my colleague, Anita Morrison-Matra, partnered with the Boston Foundation after our completion of Place Leadership Network to explore the possibility of a Roxbury DIF. We did some initial work with a consulting firm, HRNA, and began to plan out and map out and conceptualize what a Roxbury DIF would mean for the community and the benefits that it would extend to us. And then we also brought the work that we completed, the initial phase of it, to Councilor Anderson, who then, along with her staff, did research and looked into the possibility of establishing a Roxbury DIF. And much like what Philip has expressed, having a tool that centers people, that centers the community is and will remain our focus, right? And we believe that establishing a Roxbury DIF will enable the community to move in a self-sufficient way, right? And to determine how it grows and how and what is invested in. And we identified the 3 areas that the community has long talked about as I've been working, in Roxbury for the better part of 20 plus years around affordable housing, arts and culture, and workforce development, right? And we think if this tool is structured in the right way, right, meaning capturing that revenue that can be captured from the development that is taking place in Roxbury and taking a percentage of that, organizing a governing body who will then determine how those funds are allocated and come in and support and undergird where or how the areas that we've identified that need support and need. We think that this can not only have a meaningful impact, but a long-lasting impact in the community. The community has for a long time been talking about community benefits. And we think that this is the type of community benefits that's long-term, that's impactful, that centers community, that centers place keeping, that this tool can afford the community to wield. With all due respect to the chiefs, we did not, engage in this work to hand the city or the state another tool, right? For them to determine how funds that will be available in our community, how they would want to see those funds allocated, right? We approach this from a community centered place and perspective that, given the right structure, this tool can really speak to those issues that we have identified. And I think as this conversation progresses, that is the bent or the leaning that we would want to see happen coming from the city council, that we look at it from that perspective and that place, so that we are not extending another tool that gets us into that cycle, as Councilor Baker has said, into that 5-year cycle or plan, where at the end of the day, very little gets done. And we want to, I will say one more point, that Roxbury is one of the neighborhoods that has the most buildable lots. We have a number of projects that are in the queue or that are already taking place. Certainly not as many cranes are visible in the sky as in other parts of the city, but we do have an opportunity here. And as Councilor Anderson said, the time is now. We have an opportunity to really look at this tool and take it back from developers and center it back into the hands of the community. And so my push would be for us to continue that work, continue that research. We are thankful that we are still being supported by the Boston Foundation, who wants to do additional research to ensure that we can come up with a DIF that is beneficial both long and short term. So thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Bridget. Lisa?
Good morning. It's still morning. My name is Lisa Simmons. I am the Artistic and Executive Director of the Roxbury International Film Festival, as well as the Mass Cultural Council Program Manager with the Communities team that works very closely with the Roxbury Cultural District. I don't know if you know the Cultural District program, but it is an initiative that allows communities to create state-sponsored cultural districts to stimulate new arts and cultural activity and attract creative business in an area. This has been an incredibly insightful morning for me. I didn't know I was going to get all of this information about DIFs and GEO funds and capital programs. But the more that I'm learning about it and hearing about it, I do agree that, you know, I'm a lifelong Roxbury resident. My grandparents, my great-grandparents were all Roxbury residents. They remember a Roxbury very different than the Roxbury today. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could bring that back, that sort of that feeling, that community, that sense of economic stimulation into Roxbury. So I know that the DIF funds are a really impactful economic tool. You know, I think that for me as a director of the Roxbury International Film Festival now in its 25th year, talking a lot to Richard Taylor about building that theater. There used to be 3 theaters in Dudley Square. That to use this DIF money to sort of ignite arts and culture in that community. We know Jazz Urbane's going into that space in the bowling building, and I know that's taken a long time to get to that space. I know that we are very excited about having another opportunity to be in Roxbury at our own theater. We have had to move out of the Roxbury area during the festival over the last 15 or so years because there wasn't a theater that we could actually use that was viable to present the films in the way they should be presented. And we do work a lot with Hibernian Hall, but that's a whole different structure. So we are looking for something not 10 years from now, but really looking at something that can make a difference within the next 2 or 3 or 5 years. You know, it's an incredible space. It's a space where I spent my childhood with my grandparents, and we should be able to use the community to support our community by spending the dollars there and supporting a sustainable ecosystem that provides opportunities for jobs and community. You know, a DIF would provide an increase in economic opportunity for Black and brown businesses, individuals, and families by making this kind of investment in a community like you talked about Somerville's Assembly Square, which has grown exponentially over the years. They have gotten this incredible opportunity to create this space. And it's not just for residents, it's not just for Assembly Square residents, this isn't just for Roxbury residents, it's also about tourism and economic development. So I think that, you know, especially Roxbury's Nubian Square could provide that cultural and economic benefit that would have a profound effect on the community. I mean, you know the statistics. You know that the average resident in Roxbury makes $34,000 a year, with 53% making less than $71,000. You know, well, Roxbury is perfectly well suited for a DIF. It's time. Black and brown businesses and entrepreneurs are on the rise. They're looking to stay in their neighborhoods, to invest in their communities. And we should be offering that opportunity for them to grow and shine and create all of these connections to their communities. I understand that there are all of these other programs and all of the other ways that the BPDA and the state can support, but, you know, having been in the community, having been in that space and seeing it inch by inch change over time and be supported over time is not enough. You have, you know, gentrification, you have people moving into a neighborhood, you have, you know, a lack of affordable housing that you can actually own, and that, you know, what's one of the biggest problems in Roxbury. And so I do think that, you know, with the cultural center hopefully being built, with the theater being built, there still needs so much more infrastructure around that. We need stores, we need restaurants, we need people to be coming into that community and understanding the rich history of Black and brown people in that community that reaches to Mattapan, right? That reaches over to Dorchester, that is the community and the space in Boston that my grandparents and my great-grandparents grew up in. If we have to wait another 10 years, that's a long time. And if DIFs can provide that opportunity for us to move quicker on this, then all of that is going to make the difference, right? The infrastructure of roads, the connections to transportation, bringing people in and out of these spaces. The Black and brown community has disproportionately not been supported in that way for years. And if we have to wait another 10 years or another 20 years, that's not okay. That's not okay. And I feel like having sit here and learned so much more about diffs and the other things, I think that, a diff tool is the thing that's going to make our community strong. And I encourage BPDA, the City Council, to support this increment financing to be utilized in District 7 and as well as District 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. And Arthur, I know you need to go, but if you can stay for a couple minutes while Kevin gets into his thing. I just have one question about the bonds, and it's pretty easy to understand a transportation bond. And I've heard talk of it, I've heard it mentioned, and not in these circles, of social bonds. And now those social bonds, are they a thing? Is that something we can use? Because a social bond, to me, says we can use it in building a field house, we can use it in building work training programs, we can use it in theaters and architectural, artistic enhancement for neighborhoods. Is a social bond a thing?
Thank you, Councilor, for the question. Yes, a social bond is a thing in the sense that it is a label that we put on the bonds that we're going to issue. So it's not something we get, it's something we offer to people. Oftentimes, people who are buying bonds want to invest their money in things, you hear ESG, environmental, social governance. They want to know that they are putting their money in institutions that are, adhering to strong climate standards, have a social backing, or have, good governance structures, right? So it's not something that we receive, it's something that we put on our bonds that we sell. It doesn't create new capacity. We're still bound by the city's debt and borrowing limits and our ability to repay the debt on those bonds. So in this example, it would be a label that we would place on the debt that we are issuing.
Okay. And Kevin, and at this point, I'd like to pivot to the diff around Accordia, and it's more than Accordia. It's Center Court and also Mary Ellen McCormick and that whole area there. Correct, Kevin?
That's right.
And if you can get into what the best part of your presentation is, so Arthur can hear it. In case we have any questions before he needs to leave, he's got about 10 minutes, and then we can keep you here and go back and forth a bit.
So I'm Kevin Galvin. I'm a vice president at Accordia Partners, which is the developer for the Dorchester Bay City project. How do we share screen and go through the presentation? Good to go?
You got the clicker?
And I'll just respectfully note that, I'm a developer trying to illustrate how this could work, seated next to two experts that actually know how it works. So.
Right.
Oh, wait.
So as we wait for this to pop up, so here's a view of the project looking towards downtown. Chief Jemison went through the definition of a diff. So as we have gone through the planning process, I think we've heard from the community, also from the planning department, and from our elected officials that development here on Columbia Point needs to be associated with, the appropriate level of infrastructure improvement. As we look at the Columbia Point Peninsula, you can see there's a lot of parking lots, and a lot of these sites are actually state-owned. And a lot of the infrastructure that we think should be improved, and I think we've heard from the community, and they believe it needs to be improved, and our analysis supports that, are also state-owned assets.
So what does that do for us if we're looking to get city money again? So if our city, so we don't necessarily want to get a transportation bond that's all transportation if it's all state roads and state infrastructure.
I think our opinion, and I think many folks in this room would agree, if it's state-owned, the state should lead the charge. I think anecdotally, as we try to get this attention at the state level, what advances it to a point where they can be ready to move is an acknowledgement from the city that there's focus and there's belief that this is the right project to focus on. So a DIF, I think, is a more flexible tool than GeoBonds, and again, I defer to the experts here, but that allows the city to be a participant using net new property taxes from net new development. They can play a part in kind of the broader strategy. So as we look at the Columbia Point Peninsula and target JFK UMass Station, Case Circle Rotary, Morrissey Boulevard, and into raising for resiliency improvements, and the coastline and its raising for resiliency improvements. We're not only making improvements that support net new development, which will create those new revenues, but we support, a lot of jobs, a lot of new housing, and a lot of commuters that aren't necessarily functioning on the peninsula. So it grows revenue, it supports the new development, and it allows the state to play a part and benefit not just the peninsula, but other parts of the city. That's the meat. I mean, the rest of this presentation goes through, how we could potentially size it, assumptions that we've made, and that can go into some detail, but
You should keep going. I can stay for a couple more minutes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. We just want to accommodate you,
I mean,
Chief.
show them I appreciate the gesture from the council to let me go, but yeah, I've seen some of the projections you're going to see today.
So the previous page showed an outline around the Columbia Point Peninsula, which is what we're proposing as a potential DIF district, where parcels that are being proposed for development would qualify. These parcels are outlined on the next page. It includes our site, which is both the old Bayside property, which is owned by University of Massachusetts, the Santander Bank property. There are other sites, as the counselor mentioned, like Center Court, the Beat. The Archdiocese owns a site on the peninsula as well, and UMass owns some other sites that could potentially be slated for private development. This slide outlines what the existing property taxes are and their current status, whether it's exempt or commercial, et cetera.
Could you voice those, Kevin? What's coming in for tax revenue today?
So this presentation is a year old, I'll admit that, but I believe the number, and I can't see it from here, is around $6 million total. And that includes the existing Santander Bank site, the Beat, which is being redeveloped right now, Stop and Shop, Hub 25, et cetera. Those are the existing tax
And the UMass site is exempt currently?
The UMass site is exempt, the Bayside site is exempt, the Archdiocese site is exempt. There may be a couple others. And then there are the two sites on the UMass Boston campus, which have been slated for potential redevelopment, called the Calf Pasture, are obviously exempt as well.
So all of those will be coming on to city rolls?
All of those will be coming onto city rolls if they're developed by private developers.
So Accordia developing 8 buildings. If UMass is in one of those buildings, do they not pay taxes, or it's you guys that are paying the taxes, you're the landlord?
So there are some specific rules around this, and I don't want to speak for UMass.
Okay.
But if UMass does not occupy the entire building, I think a rule of thumb is it's a privately owned building, it pays property taxes.
Okay, thank you.
This slide shows what could potentially be redeveloped on the peninsula. The top box was our proposal last year. We have since updated that. It is slightly smaller. The bottom boxes are other sites, and we've made assumptions as to what the development could be there based on our proposal and just general market knowledge. Since then, Center Court has actually proposed a 1 million square foot master plan project. So at least one of these projects is now in the Article 80 process. This slide shows some of our assumptions related to how we could structure a bond. And the first set of assumptions I'll outline is we worked with a consultant called RKG Associates that maybe folks in this panel have heard of to help us determine some assumptions for future projected property taxes for the Bayside site. And that goes over land values. It looks into comparable projects and what they pay based on building assessment and land assessment. So we took those assumptions and we layered them over our assumptions on what the other potential development in the DIF district could be beyond just our project. Through that, we made a series of assumptions on phasing and when potential projects could come online over a 15-year period. Using all of those assumptions, we established a series of cash flows for property taxes flowing to the city. And then we structured a bond value by doing a net present value calculation on that series of cash flows for 30 years using a discount rate of 8%, and a discount rate essentially being an interest rate, as the chief mentioned earlier. So all those assumptions, the discount rate that we assumed, we came to a value of about $100 million. And again, we don't think $100 million solves all those issues that we described in terms of
100
infrastructure.
million over what we're collecting. You're talking about tax revenue, 100 million coming in over what we're collecting now.
No, that's a good question. The 100 million I am referencing is what we believe the value of a bond could be.
Oh, okay.
The series of cash flows, if you look at year 15, when all of the projects are built out, we project like $150 million of property tax revenue over the $6 million roughly that are paid today in that DIF district. So that's a net positive of $144 million annually. Here's those series of.
Oh,
Sorry.
Siri breaking in?
A series of panelists. So here's a series of cash flows based on our phasing assumptions. Now here are the projects that we think we've heard from the community that should be raised to the point of action needs to be done for all the development on the peninsula to succeed, including our project. Many of them are roads, transportation focused, transit focused with the T. But I do want to point out, resiliency is a big opportunity here. The Bayside site in particular is a major flood pathway into the city, not just for the peninsula, but running all the way up to Fort Point, flowing into other neighborhoods. And we all know about Morrissey Boulevard and the flooding issues that go on there. So by implementing some of these resiliency solutions, we could tie into what the city's planning as part of the Moakley Park renovation, which I think is in the capital plan. I'm not positive. Tie into what UMass has already done and tie into what could potentially be a project on Morrissey Boulevard and protect a lot of folks from potential sea level rise. Maybe that's it. So this outlines a series of projects. Again, we don't think, nor do we believe, that the city should be on the hook for paying for all of these projects. Our advocacy is around a very comprehensive capital stack that could be built where the state is the major player. The state, pays the majority of the cost. Private developers contribute in a meaningful way through mitigation funds. We think iCube is a great tool given all the net new jobs that will be coming and the public-private partnership between private development, the state, and the city. And we also think that that the DIF is a wonderful tool given that it has a little more flexibility based on what we know from typical GO bonds, given that these are mostly state-owned assets and the potential for some of the softer solutions that have been discussed already today. That's the presentation.
Thank you. And does anybody have questions in regards to this proposal here for Arthur or the team?
I think Arthur has to go, but Mr. Chair, I would like to ask
Kevin.
Kevin.
Okay, so do you have anything for Arthur? I think you're good, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You guys are okay. We'll just hammer Kevin now. You ready? We're not going to hammer you, buddy. You'll be all right.
It's good to meet you.
Okay, so you can start.
Kevin, can you please explain to me, just in the lamest terms so that I can understand the numbers, in terms of from the beginning to the end? Say you're in my seat, exactly where or how would the process work with the administration and the structure? How would I structure that so that we can actually get a
Right.
DIF going for Roxbury?
So the best I believe the mechanics work are the legislation at the state level are in place. The municipality, the city of Boston, is empowered to propose a potential DIF district. Where the collaboration is really needed is with the assessor's office, with the CFO, and with the mayor, that it gets buy-in from the executive branch. And then there needs to be a lot of collaboration on the uses. So what qualifies as something that could receive funds from the DIF? I don't think it could be as flexible as a grant process where 5 years down the line you think here's a recipient that has a lot of potential, they want to redo a theater. I think the potential set of uses needs to be determined as the DIF district is proposed, and it's a bond offering. There are private investors that will be buying that bond, and they want to see where that money is going to go, and they want to have a sense of confidence that there's a way to pay that money back. So I believe that the uses need to be established as that DIF is pitched to the bond market for potential investors.
Okay. And by collaboration, sorry, does it mean that the council, should we suggest it as an ordinance? Does it mean that the council does not have the power to vote on it and force the administration to do it, or is it something that they have to agree to?
I don't know the power of the council. I do believe that the administration needs to agree to it. I think the assessor has the power to say, here's a special district. We're going to carve out 10% of the future property tax revenues of net new development in that district to pay for this particular thing. I think that's a tool that the assessor and the CFO have the ability to do. I don't know if the council has any authority to jump in there.
I think similar to the bid, we took a vote on it that signaled across the hall, but again, we could take the vote and they could not be on board and just say no. I just want to recognize Council Mejia, who's the co-sponsor of our first docket, which is 0379.
Hello, Councilor.
You were in your questioning, so if you want to continue, then we'll come back to Council Mejia.
Yes, no, I think, in researching Worcester and Somerville, we couldn't find anything that showed that the council could actually create some sort of code. It was unclear because we do know it lives right now as a legislature in the state level, but I couldn't find anything to show how exactly it's structured. But if it's just a decision on their part, and if we're just going on record to pass a resolution, as the chair mentioned, they could say, yeah, so what, we don't agree. And so that it seems a moot because they have an interest to protect, their bonding rate, ratings and stuff like that. So I'm not sure where it would go other than, I guess, asking you for recommendations in terms of incentivizing the administration to collaborate.
I think ultimately that's where we're going to end up. A recommendation is the most we can do, and elevating it to, we believe in this strongly, but also, the point we heard around the theater or on Zoom, Roxbury is the most developable parcels available in the city of Boston. So there's a lot of potential net new tax revenue. So I think establishing a plan, an area, estimating those potential revenues, carving out what you think is a potential baseline to support the DIF, whether it's 10% of those taxes, 5% of those taxes, establishing a set of potential uses, having a plan in place that says, here it is a good way to advocate for the DIF rather than a general advocacy. I think it needs to be advanced with some detail and support so that the CFO, the assessor, can look at numbers and determine whether or not that will impact the balance sheet in a negative way, a positive way, if it's better to use GO bonds, if it's better to use other tools that the city has, or if this actually is the right tool in the toolkit to support what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. I guess, Chair, I'm not sure if you're interested in holding some sort of working session. We do have a plan in place. For me, I felt it would be better to present it first on the advocacy level and talk about it because it's a concept that may be new to a lot of the counselors. And as you see, we didn't get good attendance today, but I feel like we could try to encourage them and better organize to get more people on the table and in the room to figure out exactly, looking at the plan. We've been working for the placekeeping studios and Harvard Boston Foundation. They did this placekeeping cohort, and then also I've been working with Northeastern for over a year now on the plan. So there's a lot of work and research that's already gone into this, and this is what I mean about exacerbating a disenfranchised community's resources to force them to say, well, you're not ready, you don't have a plan, and then you don't actually get your capital ask. And even when it's in there, it doesn't actualize over a decade, or if you're lucky. So that's all I have, Chair, but it'd be wonderful to collaborate with you and look at what your work, how far you've gotten with your work so far, and see if somehow you can support us in adding to the anti-displacement plan that we have for Roxbury.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and we'll definitely do working sessions so we can figure it out. I think I do believe we do have involvement there, like, it wouldn't move forward. I believe we do have to take a vote, but I'm not totally sure on that, and in the working session, I'll have that for you. Councilor Mejia, would you like to, opening statement or questions or whatever you have?
So thank you to my colleagues. I apologize for being late. I had another commitment that I had to be at, but I made my way here. Not just because I'm a co-sponsor of this, but also because I think it's an important conversation for me to also get myself well acclimated and to learn a little bit more about kind of what are all the pathways and all the different tools that we can use to help keep our people here in the city of Boston. So really wanted to come in to listen and learn, and I'll be watching the tape to get myself up to speed. I see that, other cities have done this. I meant in the hearing order, we point to Brockton, we point to Somerville, and that Boston has not caught up. So I'm just curious, and if you have already addressed this, I apologize, but can you just help me understand kind of what are the roadblocks for Boston to jump on board?
I think the CFO and the assessor did the best job addressing it, but I think in short, in the past, they've determined it's more efficient for Boston and cheaper for Boston, given its excellent bond rating, to issue general obligation bonds rather than establish a DIF district where the interest may be higher. So they've pretty consistently functioned doing very specific bond offerings for very specific projects rather than doing DIF districts. But I'm sure the tape will offer a little more insight than I can offer.
Okay. One more question. I'm just also curious. You are a developer? Is that what you're coming from? I'm sorry, what lane are you in? So I know who I'm in front of right now.
I'm with the Accordia Partners team for the Dorchester Bay City project.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I know who I'm talking to, because I'm asking you questions that you probably will never be able to answer. So I don't want to make you uncomfortable. So let's just talk a little bit about Dorchester Bay, right? In terms of just like the planning and the outcome. I always am curious about the return on investment for any project that we invest here in the city of Boston. And return on investment, not just in terms of housing, but also work, force opportunities, and also economic empowerment. Can you just talk to us a little bit about kind of how your model and the work that you're doing at Dorchester Bay kind of mirrors some of this potential diff conversation that we're having here? Is there a connection between the two?
Absolutely. I think that to support public financing, there needs to be an analysis on the return on investment. The diff conversation is pretty specific relative to property taxes in new projects, but what we were discussing is how do we get the state to be a partner in some of these things as well. And for the state, their focus is going to be on jobs and food and beverage taxes and sales taxes. So I think there's a very direct connection with the job creation opportunities, the high-paying job creation opportunities at Dorchester Bay City, both in construction, where we're estimating 15,000 jobs, and in permanent employment. Those are very serious, revenue enhancements for the state, and real job opportunities for citizens of Boston.
Thank you. And one last question, and this is just out of curiosity, we talk about here in the hearing order that only 26% of Roxbury residents own their homes, which we know that we keep talking about more affordable housing as a pathway to help address the housing crisis that we find ourselves in. But can you just talk to us a little bit about, as we continue to move through conversations of development, what do you see as the right balance for keeping people housed, but also creating opportunities for wealth-generating opportunities? Is there a right strike and a balance that we can lean into?
In terms of giving an opinion on the balance, I'm not sure. From a advocacy standpoint, we certainly believe that there is an opportunity for more advocacy around homeownership opportunities, particularly for residents of color, and shortening that racial wealth gap. Kirk Seitz on our team, who I know you know, was part of the Boston Fed when the Color of Wealth report came out, and that disparity became so clear. I will say that on the project level for our project, we're trying to propose a very close connection with MAHA, Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, to support their home ownership fund, and that directly goes to grants to help first-time home buyers, where a vast majority, I think 93%, are residents of Boston. Almost all of them are people of color. But part of that advocacy is also to say, how can we have some of the affordable housing opportunities in our city be more homeownership opportunities? But I don't know if I can give an opinion on the right balance.
I can. That's money, Kevin. We got $500 million in ARPA money. We need to take that money in real dollars, not in increments. We need to take $5 million at a time and give it to private development so they can augment, so they can lower their bottom line and be able to sell at prices that are within the AMIs. The way we're doing it now, the amount of paperwork that everybody has to go through to get tax, what's it? I can't think of it. Anyways, to play the tax game or to get money from the city, the state, absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. There needs to be real money, dollars, front-loading programs that are building 25 units, 40 units, 100 units, front-loading them so we can scale back on the price in the back end. That's the only way to. It's the only way to do it is to give money to the developments that are happening and smaller developments. That's my opinion. The paperwork, the bureaucracy, it's all way out of control these days. It's gotten a little crazy. So I'll answer that one for you, Kevin. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. I appreciate your honesty. It's one of the things that I so much appreciate about you. I will concur and agree that, it feels like we're trying to crack the Da Vinci Code when we're trying to make anything happen here in the city of Boston. There are so many different hoops that we need to jump through just to get in line to ask a question. I just feel like we definitely need to do a better job at streamlining processes so that we can make it easier for people to be able to build and to stay. And I also think at the same time that we are in we have a unique opportunity. And I am really, even though I'm only in my third year in office, I have learned a lot about how the city works or doesn't work. And I think that is really where the opportunity lies in terms of how do we get to where we need to be without leaving anyone behind. And that is the conversation that I continue to want to be engaged in, because otherwise we're always going to be doing this and no one's going to get where they need to go, right? And so I'm encouraged by not only having this as a starting point in terms of being able to have working sessions and to really dive deeper so that we can figure out how do we get to a win where no one feels like they lost something, which is what is the hardest thing to do here in Boston. period. And then the last thing that I'll just say, and I'll just uplift him because you just mentioned him, is Kurt Sykes. His former wife, is Karen James Sykes, and she used to work at the private Boston Industry Council. And because of her, I got my first job in the 80s through the PIC program. So that is the reason why probably I give Kurt such a pass, because his wife was so instrumental in creating opportunities for me when I was in high school. But I really do appreciate you being here with us. And I am not going to hog up the mic just because I have it. I did come in late, and I want to be respectful of time, and just wanted to thank my colleagues for allowing me to participate in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the issues that I'm having, Kevin, is if we go down this path where we get a bond, not that we don't need infrastructure improvements, and not that we don't need resiliency, and not that Mount Vernon Street needs to get done over, but some of the issues that the community has that wraps around this is accessibility to the actual project. We're blocked by Kosciuszko Circle, state. We're blocked by the highway, federal. We're blocked by the train station, state. We're blocked by Morrissey Boulevard, state. So why would we, the city, me, the district city councilor, go for a $100 million transportation bond when it goes into all state things the state should be responsible for, when I think our need, and we need to look at infrastructure different from sidewalks, roads, and bridges. I want the definition of infrastructure to be my people. So we can put money into the field house and build the field house. So we can put real dollars into it. And one of the things I think we do absolutely wrong is the way we do job training. We have Madison Park High School, but we don't have those smaller neighborhood-centered places where people can stop in, and the first thing isn't say, okay, yeah, go fill out that 35-page application on a computer. Someone says that to me, I'm 20 years old looking for a job, I'm like, all right, I'll see you later, I'm out, you know? So we need to build that infrastructure. So how do we, with this opportunity here, you've stated we're going from, in just rough numbers, $6 million in real estate taxes now to upwards of $150 million. So that's $140 million extra we'll have in 10 years. And yeah, I do think 10% of that should stay in that area, whatever that area is defined as. You know, we have Dorchester, we have South Boston, we have you know, Mattapan comes through that area, Quincy comes through that area. We go into South Boston. Basically, the infrastructure that we build is going to be citywide infrastructure. Is that something that's been done? And again, a social bond. What is a social bond? And I know this is a little off your whole thing, but have you, in your many years, seen this applied any place?
I can't list an example of a diff associated with tax revenues being used to support a very specific jobs training program. I don't say that to say it can't be done. I just can't reference any examples. I think typically it's associated with, you know, a revenue enhancement opportunity, i.e. this improved road, this renovated train station will lead to the unlocking of a development, which will unlock X amount of jobs and associated tax revenues and X amount of property taxes with that new income stream coming to the city. I do think what we've heard today, though, is a diff can be flexible in how it's used. And the discussion around what the uses are just need to happen early. And happen in collaboration with the administration, but also, I think, with mass development.
So on a $100 million bond, whatever it is, whether it's transportation, social, the $100 million is obviously in your plan that you talked about. Obviously, it's known before the $100 million is on the table where it's going to be spent. So it's not like, oh, let's spend it over there, let's spend it over. So we know exactly where it's going. So you're saying those if there's agreements in place, there's the potential of doing things like that I want to do.
I think so.
Okay. I do have a couple more things, but do you have any more questions for Kevin?
I don't.
Or anything, throw it out there.
I don't have questions, but just a statement to wrap up, honestly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have to say, like, I really do appreciate your style of facilitation because it offers a different way of communication. Typically, I don't know whether it's Robert's Rules or the standard that we use here, the backdrop feels culturally insensitive to a lot of people coming in. And especially for our panelists or community panelists, and then for folks that have statements or questions. Sometimes, most of the times, community organizers and advocates have better questions than we do because they're on the ground and they are close to the work and they're hyper-focused on that job or that project. And so I really do appreciate this style and something to consider moving forward with Ways and Means Committee with all of my probably about 50 or more hearings and working sessions. But looking forward to hopefully assimilating some of your style in that because it's a better way of communicating. It's clear, it's concise, and it allows more flexibility for us to go back and forth. So thank you so much for allowing me that.
And as we move forward, if it's okay with you, the working sessions, I'd like to keep them together because they're very similar and we're trying to do the basically the same thing. It's, you know, so if we have the hearings, I'll post both the working sessions. I'll post both docket numbers, but the content is going to be, you know what the content is. We'll do it similar to this.
To add to that, then I think, you know, we know that it's flexible. We know that, as you said, it's more flexible than GEO program. We know that it can be people-centered, and that we know that historically or traditionally developers have used this tool. But we think that people can also use this tool, community can use this tool to be able to focus more on programmatic issues. And the problem is when we do just development, as to the chair's point, you can build infrastructure or you could take a long time and say there's a problem and theoretically or ideally would like to plan for this capital in order to invest in this community. But then while you're waiting, the programmatic things that need to be implemented are not taking place, and so the community suffers. So if it's community-centered, then we implement more innovative, creative ways of addressing those issues on the ground. And I think what the advocates are saying is it could be a partnership with developers involved as well, but the community has already built this up and also partnered with Boston Foundation to be able to get the support that they need in order to seed money, you know, in order for them to move this forward. And the structure that they're looking at is a community-led type of focus. And again, also with the flexibility of looking at programmatic issues to address. I look forward to, I have some research that I have to look more further into in terms of the power that the council has. And I know that I'm a counselor, fairly, not a rookie, but fairly a rookie. But the responsibility is mine to do the research, and I can appreciate you throwing that back to me. I will definitely take that on. I have some research that communities have offered for me to look into in terms of what powers we have for us to be able to expend here. So again, I will be in touch and look forward to working with you and ensuring that I think this is an opportune moment, and I'm hopeful that we're going to get something beautiful done for all communities in need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Mejia?
Thank you. I'm so sad I missed the facilitation, but I'm sure, knowing Councilor Baker, that he kept it 100% real with you all today, and I will watch the tape. So I kind of wanted just to, a follow-up question, you know, since we have you here. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I always believe that the way that you learn best is just by testing things out, like doing a little pilot. What would it look like if we were to take a very small section of a particular area and say, let's just pilot it within the realm of these 5 or 6 blocks? What lessons do you think we could potentially learn about doing something like this in a smaller, concentrated area, just so that we can learn? Because I think, I believe where there's a will, there's always a way. And if we could test things out with a low impact, right? Like we're not asking for the whole pie, we just want a little piece of it, right? What would it look like, even if it was just in a concentrated area, small little test pilot? What do you think we potentially might learn from that?
At the very least, you're going to learn, how the mechanics actually work and how we go from this conversation to, this is something that's in place. We've gone through it. We've estimated the revenues and we've issued a bond. And that's invaluable experience, I think, for the council, for the administration, for the assessor's office. In terms of the risks, I think the assessor and the CFO are better able to discuss, is it acceptable to the city's bond rating to do a test pilot with an example bond? I'd rather not comment on that, but at the very least, I think the benefit would be experience and knowing how to do it on a larger project.
Is this something that, and again, and I have to agree with my colleague, Councilor Anderson, even though I've been on the council, this is my second term, it's only 3 years, I'm still kind of learning my way around, and I'm still learning what powers we have and we don't have. I thought I could do a lot more until I got here. I'm like, what? I can't do that? So we're all learning here. And so I'm just curious, is this something that you think, from a development standpoint, that developers are, enthusiastic about? Or because I came in late to your presentation, so I'm not sure how the world of development feels about something like this.
Again, I'll speak for us. I don't want to speak for other developers, but for us, this is not a new assessment. This is not additional burden on developers. This is carving out a piece of, typical market real estate taxes and directing it to a very specific purpose that ultimately benefits and enables new development, new jobs, new housing, et cetera. So I don't see a reason why the development community would be against this. I think there's only good things that can come out of public investment in infrastructure associated with, net new development.
Yeah, well, then I think that answers the question, right? I feel like it seems like maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something here.
The development community could and should, and I think would be on board with it because they're able to provide things that communities are asking for that might be outside of the spectrum of what they would normally feel comfortable in delivering. A theater, a field house, connections that might not be in planning. I'm looking for walking paths from my community off of Crescent Ave through, and how do we get from Crescent Ave through the trains, through the highway, through Morrissey Boulevard, over to this beautiful project that's happening? How do we walk that walkway? How do we enjoy the amenities that are going to be over there? So that could be something that is able to be delivered with deliberation between the communities, development buy-in and government buy-in. So it's a sort of a three-way partnership.
And then it seems to what Councilor Anderson was saying, there's also some community aspirations around this and supporting this, right? So it seems like, which is weird because we rarely see this. It seems like the development community potentially could be on board, the community could be on board, so now we just have to get everybody else on board, it sounds like.
Well, if the community has wish lists, this can potentially be a way to pay for them.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity. Thank you.
Kevin, one question. We talked about the bonds a little bit, and I'm not looking to do something that someone has to keep a magnifying glass on for the next 10 years to make sure that we're paid attention to. I think maybe I'm going to abandon that thought. Is there an opportunity, someone had mentioned over here, could you do a neighborhood-specific trust with board members? So in 8 years or 10 years, there's a Dorchester trust that's 10% of this TIF area. Is that asking too much? Is that getting us in trouble?
It's an appropriate question. I don't know if the diff conversation is where that trust can be enabled. I think that, setting up a trust that has a fund and revenue mechanisms that can support that fund, and then there's an oversight board that determines where those funds can be used. I think that's separate from the diff conversation.
Yeah.
I think the diff has, here's a project, here's projected revenues, here's the bond gets paid, project gets done, and now it's all about executing on the private development in order to get those real estate taxes that can help pay down that bond. I don't think it can really set up a fund that just sits there and can be distributed
I think
over
that's
time.
what Jimmy Kelly tried to do years ago when the convention center was going on. He was looking to do a South Boston specific trust fund that would help that community over there with the lion's share of what was coming in from the convention center, but Menino blocked him on that one, and it didn't happen. So, but that's, if South Boston had supports back then, there might still be some Southie people in Southie. There's no Southie people left there. There are some, but not. I'm getting past it. Kevin, thank you for coming out. And you didn't mention your discussion with Maha is a $10 million contribution to Maha that's over and above all of this. That's not tied into any diff. That's not tied into any IDP. That's not tied into anything but a conversation between your organization and Maha?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So now we got to figure out how we build the units that the people that are getting the grants for first-time buyers can get into. That's where the problem. My concern is that $10 million is going to all be spent outside of the city. I mean, good for the people that are able to find houses wherever they find them, but that's what I think is going to happen.
How can we get linkage into the hands of developers as quick as we can, right?
Well, and again, that's a conversation about direct designation. If we have big money going into, and Arthur talked about the housing trust and the jobs trust, I've sat on both of them. I think we need to take more than, in the jobs trust, it's 50,000 all around the whole city. We need to invest millions, couple million into building this, couple million into building that. Housing trust, even more. Let's take the 10 million we're getting this year and build one building that has 40 units. Well, you wouldn't get 40 units for 10 million. That would be a miracle. But you know what I'm saying? We need to, so if we're front-loading these projects, now we can sell them at substantially below market for those first-time buyers. And maybe that's part of a diff in this here too, where we tie on real monies that will go towards building units instead of bureaucracies.
May I?
Sure.
I actually filed a hearing order to discuss rent-to-own projects, and after some research, we found a model that could potentially work in Massachusetts. The idea is to do exactly that, to look at how we can look at funding for projects with developers in order to build this pathway to home ownership. And if they're renters, then some sort of like nonprofit partnership would be required in order to manage that transition, right? Going from using rental credit payments as credit, as well as looking at alternative to predatory lending, looking at better loans, but also, as to Council Baker's point, this project we would have already funded a portion of it, a huge portion of it. So the burden wouldn't be on the developer to try to make or squeeze some sort of profit out of their project. They would instead be more inclined or incentivized to sell it at a lower rate because they could still make profit. I mean, as a business person, you're not a developer not to make profit. That wouldn't make any sense. And so how could we partner with private developers to do that? So I'm also hoping to see that in Roxbury. I did use the theater as an example of when you ask for a capital project, how it just goes and and sort of dies somewhere in a corner. But it's essentially we're looking at a feasibility study in addition to the anti-displacement project that we've done already. We've surveyed and assessed and looked at what the community wants, but also really studied the deficits in comparison to the assets in Roxbury to understand what would actually build quality of life in Roxbury. So we have a very comprehensive, hopefully very reasonable approach to this. We're looking to balance people's way of life, but also redistributing the resources so that in Roxbury, the dollars can stay there. You could shop there, you could live there, you can thrive there, you can decompress your stressors because you have a place to go and just relax after work, that kind of thing. So again, I am excited to partner with you in the future, and I thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this.
Yep. Councilor Mejia, anything else?
I just want to underscore and then just go on the record supporting both of my colleagues here as we continue to have this conversation. I think it's important for us to be fiscally responsible too, right? Like, we have a lot of aspirations, but you know, what I am learning is sometimes what we want to do, we can't do in this moment. So I'm always trying to figure out what can we do to get us closer to where we need to be. And I think that that's always the balance that I'm trying to strike as we continue to move through all of these conversations, because at the end of the day, you know, I don't think we're asking for too much, right? But it always feels like we are. And I think the goal here, at least for me, is to figure out what is the right balance of getting us to where we need to be without upsetting as many people as possible, which is the hardest thing to do in the world of politics. But I do think that these sort of ideas get us closer to that sort of like win-win situation where everyone feels seen and heard and validated. So I really do appreciate you all and the efforts that you have made through navigating this process, and to my colleagues for bringing this forth. I look forward to not only supporting it, but you already know I have a big mouth, so I'll be amplifying it as ever you see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And Kevin, thank you for staying with us. You were involved in a lot of things that were outside your purview on this, so I appreciate it. Thank you, and good job in your work you did with our diff there. Hopefully we can get some consensus and move it along for the time, in the appropriate time, so we can actually capture this and do this. With that being said, I don't see anybody for public testimony. Is there anybody on Zoom for public testimony? Nobody on Zoom. With that, again, Kevin, thank you, and thank the administration for your board, and thank you for your board. You brought out. This hearing is adjourned.